Hello, church. Today's reading is from John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. It's the story of Jesus clearing the temple. Now, I imagine that as I just told you what the story is, that your brain automatically filled in a few assumptions about this text. But do me a favor. Try to not pay any attention to those. Really try to clear your mind of what you already know about this story and open yourself up to hearing it for the first time. Otherwise, if we only ever expect to hear the same thing every time we read a particular story of Scripture, then we set ourselves up to only hear the same thing every time. Instead, prepare your mind to hear something new or to be surprised by what you might find. The word of the Lord from John chapter 2. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. I have heard a plethora of ways to describe the emotion behind this story. Most commonly, I hear people describe Jesus as angry, or full of righteous anger, wrathful, or even vengeful. But what I rarely hear is the description that is actually in the text, which is zeal or zealous. I assume in part that is because we typically avoid the word zeal because it's one of those church words that we don't like to use. It sounds old-fashioned, its meaning isn't always clear to us, and sometimes we even are worried that if we use the word, it makes us sound a little, too church nerdy. We might be comfortable with some church words, but zeal typically isn't one. Which is a shame when it comes to this particular story, because zeal is the key to unlocking the whole thing. John tells us that as his disciples watched, as Jesus was clearing out the temple, they remembered how the scriptures said, "Zeal for your house will consume me." And it's really the perfect way to describe this moment. Zeal means passion, but not just any passion. It's not like some sort of passion for good tacos. It's not like a craving for a midnight snack. Rather, zeal is a passion toward a certain objective or goal. Jesus isn't simply being wrathful or angry at people because they're selling things in the temple. That's an oversimplification. But he is passionate toward a certain objective. And we should be asking what that objective is. The answer lies in what Jesus says while he is clearing the temple. We get so caught up on the whip that he makes and the tables that he overturns that we don't always pay attention to the words that he says here. He tells the crowd that they can tear down the temple and he will rebuild it in 3 days. In their confusion, the crowd misses his meaning. And in our confusion of zeal for anger, we run the risk of missing his meaning as well. When Jesus speaks of tearing down the temple, John reminds us that he is really talking about his death and resurrection. For Jesus, there's a clear line connecting the cleansing of the temple with the cross. And that line is where we find and understand this zeal, this passion of Jesus. It's the same zeal that motivates Jesus to drive the people out of the temple, that motivates Jesus to die on the cross. This zeal is a passion that works toward the goal of reconciling the world back to God. As such, anywhere that there is sin, injustice, corruption, or a distance that would separate or prevent us from being reconciled back to God, there is also the zeal of Jesus to do what must be done to remove these obstacles that would distance us from God. Take the money changers and those selling animals for sacrifices as an example. These people have perverted the sacrificial system that was created by God in the Old Covenant, the system that was meant to help bring the people and God together by removing the sin that would separate them. They've commercialized and perhaps even extorted the people who are trying to bring themselves back to God and make atonement for their sins. There's potentially the risk that they're making a profit from the very sins of these people. So Jesus, acting with zeal, not anger, drives them from the temple so that the work of reconciliation and atonement can be done. He's not mad because someone's child is promoting a school fundraiser in the lobby of the church. He's passionately trying to remove the obstacles that stand between the people of God and God. It's passion that drives people, that he uses to drive people out, not anger. And it's passion that also drives Jesus to the cross. It's not the anger of God that demands Jesus' death, but it is Jesus' passion that leads him as a silent lamb to sacrifice his life for all of us. We even call the crucifixion the passion of Jesus. And in Latin, the word passion means to suffer. Zeal for God's house, God's kingdom, consumes Jesus. It is zeal that encompasses the all-consuming care and compassion and motivation and love that we see in John 2. And it's the same zeal that expresses itself as the suffering passion that we see at the cross. So, as Jesus looks out on the perversion of the old covenant in John 2, he drives out the people who would complicate the covenant, who would add to the separation between God and the people, and who would take advantage of the people and their sin. Not because he's angry, but because he is zealous and passionate and driven by his desire to save the world. And at the peak of his zeal in this moment, he tells the crowd that they could kill him and he would rise again in 3 days because nothing, not even death, could stop him from the work of salvation. In fact, his death and resurrection is the very proof of his authority by which he drives them out of the temple. It is because of the cross that Jesus has the authority to act on his zeal here in John 2. And it's that zeal that leads him to the cross that gives him the authority for his entire ministry. So before we go around flaunting the one time we think Jesus was angry, let us not forget that it is zeal that consumed him, not anger. And before we try to use Jesus' actions in John 2 to justify our own anger or our own acts of violence, agendas, or hasty actions, let us remember that it was a passion for reconciliation and salvation that motivated Jesus. And above all, let us never forget the overwhelming, consuming zeal and passion of Jesus to reconcile and save the people of God. You, me, your neighbor, your enemy, the people who annoy you, the money changers, and those of the temple to make sacrifices, the righteous and the unrighteous, everyone. Jesus will stop at nothing to reconcile the world back to God. He would even give his own life, defeat death, and rise again 3 days later. And I pray that we too can be consumed and enveloped in the zeal and love of Jesus, and that we remove all the obstacles that would prevent us from being reconciled to God. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May God make God's face to shine upon you and give you peace.